Hello. We're going to be reading some more Hitler's Wonderland today, and we're going to be finishing up. And I just remembered, just now as I was doing the introduction, that I forgot to do chapters for the last stream, so I'll have to remember to do that. And I'll get everything for this stream too, and then it'll be good. So let's see. Yesterday, I keep trying to say last week. But yesterday we talked about, I don't think there was much to talk about yesterday. We just kind of talked about like some communists and socialists, their reactions to the reforms that Hitler made. You know, they were horrified that he would abolish usury. We talked about how Hitler ended unemployment and the food programs he gave for the poor. And today, we're going to finish the book. We're going to talk about the international reaction, maybe, international perspectives. And then we'll be done. So my goal was to finish this during so-called banned book week. And it looks like we're going to make it, unless something happens to my connection or something. But we'll see. I don't like to celebrate too early, but it's looking good. I think we're going to do it. This is chapter 15, Problems of a Nation. Who in the world am I? Ah, that's the great puzzle. When a nation begins talking about its problems, observers of international politics pessimistically shake their heads and buy more shares in armament factories. Problems, as a great statesman once remarked, are merely pretexts. At the beginning of this century, the so-called Central Europe problems paved the way for the World War. The problems of the early American colonists culminated in the War of Independence, and so on through the history of the world. The difficulty when considering a nation's avowed problems is not to determine whether these are genuine or justifiable, but to decide on their sincerity. When a nation voices specific complaints, are they genuine, or are they being used as a cloak to hide some deep and dark motive? Contrariwise, can a nation's problems be used by neighbors as a vehicle for their own private ambitions? In the light of these considerations, Germany's problems take on an added interest. Hitler is voicing three complaints which are, as usual, represented by much advertised slogans. We want a greater Germany, a nation without room, and equal rights. Translated, these slogans mean that Germany refuses to continue in the rank of a second-rate nation. She wants equality of armaments. She would like the return of her war-annexed territories. She does not think the Versailles Treaty is equitable, and she would like to find room for her surplus population. An undoubtedly comprehensive policy, which obviously cannot find favor with Germany's neighbors. Their argument is that Germany is responsible for the Great War, therefore she must be content to pay for her sins by losing some of her territories and remaining in a state of military inferiority. And that is where opinions differ. As she stands today, Germany condemns Article 231 of the Versailles Treaty, which states that she and her allies were responsible for the war. As this article is the foundation on which the treaty is built, she condemns the whole treaty as inequitable. 15 years ago, on May 7, 1919, Count Brockdorff-Rantzau, foreign minister of the First German Republic, said to the Allies, "We are asked to recognize that we alone are responsible for the war. Coming from me in a mission like that would be a lie." Hitler has not altered those words today. For that reason, there can never be an understanding between Germany and the ex-Allies, in particular France, until the Versailles Treaty is either completely modified or totally abolished. Diplomatic discussions about the Tsar, disarmament, and the Danzig corridor can be compared to two colorblind men discussing the relative merits of blue and yellow. How can France and Germany reach an accord over the question of disarmament when they disagree on the 15-year-old foundation of their present disagreement? Some solution must be found very shortly, is the unanimous cry of European states. Otherwise, What basis of agreement would be satisfactory to Germany and acceptable to France, Poland, and the Little Entente? According to Hitler, that basis should be the Lansing Note signed on November 5, 1918, 6 days before the armistice, because the terms of that note, although very strict, allowed Germany to breathe instead of crushing her under the colossal weight of the Versailles Treaty. In the Lansing Note, Germany agreed to pay reparations amounting to approximately 30 billion marks, return Alsace-Lorraine to France, and evacuate all occupied territories. In a general way, it was the fulfillment of President Wilson's famous 14 points. But in the Lansing Note, there was no question of war responsibility, no question of cutting up Germany's eastern frontier for the benefit of Poland and Czechoslovakia, not a word about forbidding Austria to remain Germany's ally, no mention of total disarmament, and not a whisper about demilitarized zones. It was a high but eminently just price to pay for peace, and Germany was prepared to pay it, not because she considered herself responsible for the war, but because she had lost it. She was beaten. Her troops were starving. There was open mutiny in the fleet. Revolution was threatening on all sides. Financiers had withdrawn their valuable support and caused the suicide of Albert Ballin, the Kaiser's financial advisor. In short, Germany was kaput, and she knew it. And that is why she was ready to agree to the terms of the Lansing Note, however hard those might be, and to sign the armistice on November 11th, 1918. It's crazy that the financial guy's name was Ballin. Had things remained at this point, it is very probable that Germany would never have seen a Hitler, but the Allies were not satisfied with returning Alsace-Lorraine to France and making Germany pay for all the material damage she had done. They thought a little territorial remolding was necessary to Europe's welfare. So after nearly a year of deliberation, the Versailles Treaty was drawn up and signed. Germany's eastern frontier was cut up, and pieces given to Poland and Czechoslovakia. Hungary lost important territories to Poland, Romania, and Yugoslavia, and France took control of the Rhineland and the rich Saar Basin. The Allies, when they signed the treaty, little knew that they were laying a mine in the center of Europe, a mine with the slow detonator fuse, which has taken 15 years to burn, almost to the end. The gross Deutschland problem is that territories in Czechoslovakia and Poland inhabited by a percentage of Germans should be brought back into the Reich, the Saar should be returned, and Austria allowed to choose whether she prefers autonomy or a Nazi government. On the first point, no one denies that Germany's demands are justified. By what right did the Allies take the Danzig corridor from Germany and give it to Poland? And why has Czechoslovakia been given a small portion of Silesia? As for the dismemberment of Hungary, the injustice is even greater. However, the eastern frontier problems are not causing Hitler as much anxiety as the Saar and Austria. The Saar question cannot have an immediate solution, because that district, with a population of approximately 750,000, is under the nominal control of the League of Nations. In 1935, the Saar is due to have a plebiscite by which the inhabitants will have to decide whether they want to stay under the League's wing with French commercial control or return to Germany. During 1933, Hitler made friendly advances to France for the immediate return of the Saar, but although French statesmen frankly admitted that the territory was German in heart and culture, the offer was firmly rejected. Lately, a complication has arisen in the shape of a religious dissension. Seeing that there was no possibility of obtaining the return of the Saar by diplomatic routes, the Nazis began a propaganda campaign to ensure that the Saarites would be suitably Nazi-minded when the time came for the plebiscite. This campaign, under the direction of Nazi extremists, took the form of a mild terrorism which has apparently had an effect contrary to the one desired. A group of dissidents, headed by Herr Max Braun, previously expelled from the Reich by Hitler, had sent a petition to the League of Nations Council asking for a postponement of the plebiscite in the hope that conditions might become less troubled later on. At the same time, the religious controversy which raged in Germany, together with the new sterilization law, caused indignation among the Catholic inhabitants of the Saar and prompted them to organize an anti-Hitler movement. We refuse, they said, to return to a National Socialist state because that state is incompatible with our idea of the world. But we still consider ourselves good Germans. We wish to return to a Germany where there is room for everyone and where there reigns a spirit of Christianity. This Catholic association launched an appeal to all the Catholics in the district to obtain from the League of Nations the dissolution of Nazi organizations in the Saar. in view of the fact that 92% of the Tsarites are said to be Catholics, the appeal is liable to receive strong support. However, that part of Hitler's Greater Germany idea will automatically solve itself in a year's time, either one way or another, but the second part of the problem presents greater difficulties. What do the Nazis intend to do with Austria? In his book, My Battle, written many years ago, Hitler already says that he considers Austria as part of Germany. He was born an Austrian, but always considered himself a German at heart. There are many Austrians today who share this sentiment and refuse to admit the autonomy of Austria on political, historical, and spiritual grounds. To give a tangible expression to their feelings, these pan-Germans have organized themselves into an unofficial Austrian Nazi party and are attempting to overthrow the Dollfuss government, to which Dollfuss quite naturally objects very strenuously. The Austrian Nazi Party is very strong, but so is Dollfuss, because, well, the one has the moral and possibly material support of the German Nazis. The other has the moral backing of France and the League of Nations. Considering the close historical connections between Austria and Germany, one is inclined to wonder why the little chancellor should offer such strong resistance to German rule. One reason may be that in 1932, Austria concluded a little financial deal with France, through which she practically sold her independence for £10 million in the Lausanne loan. Under the terms of the loan, which was designed to enable Austria to pay her worst debts and repair her shattered finances, she was obliged to renew her promise not to join herself to Germany for another 20 years, a case of Esau selling his birthright for a mess of pottage. The loan was made under the auspices of the League of Nations, and the money was subscribed mostly by France and England. The Redditors may be afraid that if Austria passes under Nazi rule, their loan will be subjected to the same treatment as the one applied to Germany's own foreign debts, i.e., the money will be indefinitely frozen. Therefore, Austria's fervent protestations of patriotism may be nothing but a cloak to hide a series of purely financial considerations, an example of problems being used as pretexts. If the Nazis intend to incorporate Austria into the Reich, they will have to do it by force. The only other solution is that Dollfuss could call for a plebiscite to show whether the majority of the people want to be Austrians or Germans. But if one is to believe what one hears in Germany, Dollfuss does not dare call for this popular vote, because he knows only too well that the majority would cry Heil Hitler, which did end up happening. Those are the ingredients of the Gross Deutschland problem. Although Hitler has said that he expected all the territorial questions to be solved by peaceful negotiations, his expectations are obviously far too optimistic. France and Poland are not particularly anxious to see Hitler realize his dream of a greater Germany. What would be the ultimate result if Herr Hitler suddenly found himself at the head of a Reich with 100 million or even 150 million inhabitants? Besides that, Poland is not anxious to lose the very rich industrial Posen territory, nor is France particularly desirous of losing the Saar, which is the fifth best customer for her export trade. It all comes back to the Versailles Treaty. There is only one suggestion to be made with regard to the territorial question, and that is that France and the Central European states should make Germany the offer of replacing the Versailles Treaty by the pre-armistice Lansing Note. This would, if the Germans are sincere in their demands, reduce Germany's 3 foreign problems to 1. Unfortunately, the large number of international financial interests that are at stake in the Saar and Central Europe make this suggestion extremely impracticable. So he didn't talk about South Tyrol at all. Hitler dedicates a significant portion of Mein Kampf to reclaiming that territory, but it was given to Italy after the war, and because of the alliance between Italy and Germany, they just kind of came to an agreement on South Tyrol, and it stayed a part of Italy. And I remember seeing somebody, I don't know, podcaster or whatever, saying like, oh, if Hitler was just attacking anyone, if Mussolini had, a territory that Hitler wanted, Hitler would have attacked him too. But yeah, he did. He had that territory, and they made an agreement. Just like Austria and the Sudetenland, at least, for Czechoslovakia. Even though Czechoslovakia wasn't really invaded. I mean, it kind of was, but not a single shot was fired, so They the Nazis rode tanks into the country, it's true, but then they just rode them straight to the Capitol and held a parade. But that's a little irrelevant, so we'll continue on. The next problem is that of Germany's overpopulation. Volk ohne Raum. Is that just another catch slogan? Or is Germany really overpopulated in comparison with other countries? Actual figures appear a little startling. British Empire, including native populations, have 8 inhabitants to 1 square mile. France has 5 inhabitants to 1 square mile. And Germany, with no colonies, has 90 inhabitants to 1 square mile. It is obvious that with the passage of years, the density of the population will continue to increase until Germany eventually reaches Japan's well-known overpopulation. There are 4 hypothetical solutions to the problem. 1. Reduce the number of births. 2. Create colonies inside the Reich, i.e., attempt to use up every square inch of soil at present infertile. This is the object of the Arbeitsdienst and the small holding scheme now in force. 3. Find real colonies outside the Reich, in Africa or elsewhere. In other words, contravene the Versailles Treaty. 4. Conquer new territories adjacent to Germany. The first solution is incompatible with the Nazi policy of race perfection. The second is insufficient, because if every square inch of German soil were agriculturally productive, there would still be a deficit. The third is a difficult one, because it brings everything back to the days of the Kaiser. Colonies mean the construction of a strong fleet and the dangerous competition of England. The fourth, therefore, would seem to be the one to consider. And just to refresh our memories, the fourth one was conquering new territories adjacent to Germany, which Hitler talks about in Mein Kampf. Go figure. Where in Europe can Germany expect to find new territories? To the west lie Alsace-Lorraine and Belgium, both thickly populated, and France is obviously out of the question. In his autobiography, Hitler says, if one wishes to procure land in Europe, one can only do so at the expense of Russia. Germany's former successes have always been in the east, therefore the new Reich must follow in the footsteps of the ancient Ritter. What has Soviet Commissar Litvinov to say to that? Addressing the Soviet Central Executive Committee in December 1933, he said, quote, we reproach present-day Germany for forgetting the friendly cooperation which has existed for a decade and might exist again in spite of the difference in political systems, and for forgetting how the USSR was Germany's sole friend against the Versailles Treaty, enabling her to wrest concessions from the victors of the Great War. In spite of this aid, relations have deteriorated and become unrecognizable, and German political leaders propound anti-Soviet ideas, including the idea of cleaving away eastward for Germany with fire and sword. What is our opinion about the German regime? Comrade Litvinov continued. Certainly we have a definite opinion, but we do not wish to meddle in Germany's internal affairs. Our relations are not based on internal conditions, but on Germany's foreign policy. We do not wish expansion either east or west. We do not hate the German people or want their land to threaten their rights, and we will never encourage others thereto. End quote. And I think Litvinov was also a Jew, which may have influenced his views of Germany a bit. Let's check Litvinov. Yeah. He was born to a Yiddish-speaking Lithuanian Jewish banking family. So, you know, your quintessential Russian, I guess. It's just crazy how many of these early Soviet Union people weren't actually Russian. All right, so continuing on. So I'm just pointing that out because that probably influenced a lot of his decisions relating to Germany at the time. Although Litvinov's statement is full of inaccuracies in view of the active connection between German communism and the USSR, it shows that the Soviet Union is a little uneasy and fully realizes the danger of Nazi ideas on Eastern expansion. I had this problem in mind when I spoke to a man who is quite an influential Nazi. When you say Eastern expansion, I asked, how far do you really want to go? We want nearly half of Poland and a substantial piece of Lithuania, was the reply. Surely you do not seriously expect to secure this Lebensraum, room to live, without war against Poland. War will be quite unnecessary. The Soviet state is now entering into a period of disintegration, and within 50 years we will be able to offer Poland territorial compensation in the Ukraine. It sounds very simple. Wait and see. It is indeed an amazing prediction. Will the Soviet Republic fall within the next 50 years? Several black clouds have lately appeared in the communist sky. Japan threatens in the east. Germany has an eye on the west, while the Ukraine is in a state of almost open revolt against the government. The Ukraine may be the deciding factor. If ever there is a war with Japan, the Soviets will be obliged to concentrate their troops in the east, and then the Ukraine may take the opportunity of declaring a counter-revolution. In that they will be helped by large contingents of white Russians at present living in Yugoslavia and Germany, who have been organizing an unofficial army for many years. Again, my Nazi's prediction does not appear too outrageous when one remembers that a large percentage of the Ukrainian population is of German origin. Huge colonies of German immigrants entered southern Russia at the invitation of Catherine the Great. Whole villages are German in architecture and character, while many of the inhabitants still speak a corrupt form of 18th century German. In Berlin, I saw an enormous collection of letters written by some of these German colonists in the Ukraine. Some of them, written on a Soviet marriage form, described the appalling starvation in the villages, and ended up with the words, "When will Hitler come and deliver us?" The recently concluded German-Polish Pact of Non-Aggression, valid until 1944, may be a significant corroboration of my Nazi friend's prophecy. Germany and Poland have shelved the Danzig corridor problem for the time being and are now entering into a period of peaceful cooperation. No one quite understood the reason for Hitler's sudden volte-face, with regard to Poland. If it is true that the Soviet Republic is in danger of collapsing, then it is obvious that Germany and Poland have a mutual interest in preserving cordial relations until the time comes for sharing certain parts of Russia between them. And the mistreatment of Ukraine during the early invasion of Russia is, I think, pretty widely considered like one of the biggest mistakes that the Nazis made, because they failed to get the support of the populace, and they had to, instead of being able to leverage them to further the war, they had to keep them in line and try to push their battle lines. And then when things started going to shit, they were just forced out of the area almost immediately. All right, continuing on. Those are, however, considerations for a more remote future. The Volk ohne Raum slogan is being drummed into the Germans' heads, and the question of colonies is once more openly discussed in the Reich. The important point of this overpopulation question is that in 1914 the Kaiser was already shouting that very same formula. Germany claimed to be overpopulated in 1914. She wanted expansion, and the result, according to the Allies, was the Great War. Today Hitler is merely reviving the Kaiser's complaint, and, as before, Germany's neighbors appear to pay no attention to it. If Germany is overpopulated, as figures seem to show, then it should be the desire of every nation in Europe to help her solve her economic quandary. Instead of giving Hitler the cold shoulder, France ought to give him a small piece of the Sudan or Middle Congo. England might add a portion of Kenya or Uganda. Belgium could contribute a corner of the Belgian Congo, and so on, until by a policy of friendly cooperation, Germany's problem of Lebensraum would be solved with great ease. Such a solution might be possible in Sir Thomas More's Utopia, but in the present-day world it can only be regarded as either ultra-idealistic or faintly humorous. So that's kind of a reminder of the situation at the time. People look at the idea of Lebensraum and they're like, oh, look how imperialistic Germany was at the time. But I mean, you look at the territory that Germany wanted to claim on the world map, and you look at the French Empire and Italy's territories and the British Empire and the Soviet Union and the American Empire, like America and all the American territories. It's really kind of negligible how far the Eastern expansion was proposed to be compared to how much land these other empires had taken. The last, but by no means the least, of Hitler's slogans is equal rights or I'll just try to read this. Gleichberechtigung. Gleichberechtigung. Equal rights, or if a spade is to be called a spade, equal armaments. Hitler demands that Germany be considered as a first-class nation and allowed to have a military strength equal to that of her neighbors. Negotiations are proceeding between Germany and France, the latter being the most important neighbor, and it may miraculously occur that a solution will be found through diplomatic channels. And as this possibility is, in most opinions, extremely doubtful, the question of Germany's armaments may be discussed in status quo. One might be tempted to add in status quo antebellum. And no, he actually included a translation of his Latin this time. Wow, how nice. There's a footnote. If the reader has forgotten his Latin, this means in the state which was before the war. Thanks. And that's the end of that chapter. Man, I don't know what's going on. I keep having to clear my throat. But we see kind of the Lebensraum problem and the idea of colonies thrown around, which I kind of interjected a little bit and talked about, so I won't go too much into it, or too much more into it, you know. Pretty much said all there is to say, and then history says the rest. I think this chapter is a little bit longer. Chapter 16, War-Mongers and Pacifists. If everybody minded their own business, the Duchess said in a hoarse growl, the world would go round a deal faster than it does. Everyone has now agreed that Germany has a right to demand equality of armaments, even France agrees to it, and is willing to discuss the question diplomatically. Since the advent of Hitlerism, there is no longer any talk of general disarmament, Germany's neighbors being chiefly worried about what will happen when the Reich is once more fully armed. Hitler's official demands are not causing any real anxiety. He asks for a larger Reichswehr, heavy artillery, and military airplanes, and France, out of sheer habit, contradicts him by quibbling over a matter of a few guns and 100,000 soldiers. The real cause of the fear complex that is sweeping Europe at the moment is the contention that Germany possesses enormous secret armaments and a huge unofficial army. The French government have in their possession a dossier which pretends to show how far the Reich has rearmed, in contradiction to the provisions of the Versailles Treaty. They are toying with the idea of presenting these facts to the League of Nations and then possibly invading Germany for the sake of protection. Although the contents of that famous dossier have not yet been published, close observers of Nazi developments can make a guess at the contents. So this was written in 1934, and you can see that France and England were already kind of beating the drums of war at this point. I forget what year it was that the French Prime Minister put up a map of Germany, like carved up and split up between the different nations on TV. But it was before the war started. It was fairly early on, and it may have already happened at this point. I don't remember the year. Germany's manpower is the first point. The official army, though comparatively small, is made up of long service men who can be immediately promoted in case of war. Consequently, the Reichswehr is a military nucleus allowing immediate expansion. This in itself is not a very important factor, because the same can be said for all armies. Besides the Reichswehr, however, there is the police, which is accused of being organized on military lines. The men are released from ordinary duty for 2 months every year, during which time they are said to receive intensive military training. Although this assertion is hard to prove, it is discounted by the fact that the police in every country must be run on military lines for the sake of discipline. To the warmongers, the smallest suggestion of militarism is significant. The fact that the entire English police is commanded by an ex-army brigadier general should be ample proof that England is contemplating using her police for military purposes. More important than the army and the police are the various Nazi organizations, the SA, SS, and Stahlhelm. Their existence is causing anxiety to millions of peace-loving French bourgeois who already see, in their mind's eye, Paris besieged by a brown-shirted army. There is no doubt that these organizations are run on military lines and that their members receive a certain amount of military instruction. A very rudimentary instruction, it is true, but sufficient to be used as a proof of militarism. The total manpower is obviously difficult to assess. Some say 2 million, others 1 million, etc. An approximate figure can be reached as follows. Reichswehr, 150,000. Time expired Reichswehr, 120,000. Police, 80,000. Nazi organizations, 1 million. And there's a footnote that says this figure only includes the young, able-bodied members of the SA, SS, and Stahlhelm. The total membership of these three organizations is, of course, much higher. And that all gives us a total of 1,350,000. Germany's reply to these calculations, compiled by foreign observers, is that with the exception of the Reichswehr, none of the men have a real training in modern warfare, for the simple reason that they have no modern weapons at their disposal. The time-expired regular soldiers are of little use except in the matter of discipline, because they have not been able to keep up with the rapid progress made in armaments during the last few years. Several ex-officers, both English and French, have admitted to me that they would require at least 6 months intensive training to become conversant with the latest weapons. The same argument is applied by Germany to her police and Nazi organizations. The men are subjected to military training, it is true, but only a very elementary training. They cannot be taught to handle a modern anti-aircraft gun because there ain't none available for practice. And if you want more information about this kind of situation that Germany was in, where there was progress being made in armaments, and they had all these untrained people still using like horses and shit. I recommend reading Guderian's memoirs, Panzer Leader. It's pretty, especially like the beginning. It's pretty eye-opening on how he tries to get this tank program set up in Germany. And there were people just stuck in the past who were like, motor vehicles are only for transporting flour and provisions, is what one person actually said to him. So you can imagine kind of the difficulties they faced in modernizing the army. All right. Warmongers are necessarily exaggerators. It gives them a sadistic pleasure to point to Hitler's stormtroops and exclaim, "There are over 1 million fully trained soldiers ready for war." Having seen an SA standard amuse itself for hours, running across a field in deployed formation, falling flat on the ground, getting up again, and so on, I am inclined to doubt that the brown-shirted youths are really fully trained for war. Every country in the world has a large number of men who are ready for war and who are far more efficiently trained than stormtroopers. Thousands of potential officers are turned out every year by England's OTC, Officer Training Corps. Hundreds of thousands of men are trained by France and Poland through their compulsory conscriptions. The latter are not given a few hours military training per week. They live in barracks for a year or more and are trained several hours each day. The United States have no conscription, but thousands of boys receive military training in private schools called military academies. The question of manpower is given an exaggerated importance. If war were declared tomorrow, the countries concerned would bring out equally large and efficient armies. Hitler, with his million-odd stormtroopers, would be in no better position than France with her conscripts, but the Nazi uniformed organizations are being held up as a European bogey and a sure proof that Germany intends to declare war on somebody in the near future. In the chapter dealing with the stormtroops, I have pointed out the real reason for their creation. As things stand today, it would be very dangerous to disband either the SA or the Stahlhelm, because then these thousands of young men would once more be thrown on the streets, the prey of demoralization and anarchy. So much for manpower. The next point of the French dossier is that which deals with secret armaments. There is ground to doubt whether French investigators have discovered the place where Hitler keeps his secret store of weapons, but what is causing the most anxiety is the study of munition factories in Germany's civil aviation. Accusations of industrial preparation for war are simple to make and hard to prove. The prosperity of any concern remotely connected with armaments is constantly used to substantiate a war scare. Nevertheless, there is no doubt that the shares of certain firms have risen out of all proportion. The shares of the Berlin Karlsruher Industrie Werke, specializing in small arms, rose from 58 marks in 1932 to 88 marks in 1933. The Bayerisch Motoren work making airplane engines showed an increase of 74 marks from 64 marks in 1932 to 138 marks in 1933. Krupp, Mauser, Siemens, Daimler, and Zeiss have all taken on extra labor, the total for these firms being around 10,000 men. There again, personnel increases are quite likely to be due to Hitler's coercion previously described. No one can definitely say that all these firms are manufacturing war material. No more than one can prove that Germany's increased metal imports are an indication of rearmament. There has been an enormous increase in German imports of iron, copper, nickel, and aluminum, all of which are used for munitions. But there has also been a tremendous increase in automobile production and the manufacture of industrial and agricultural machinery due to Hitler's new tax laws. There's a footnote. It says in 1933, the German automobile factories showed an increase in production of 85% over the preceding year. And that's the famous Porsche and Autobahn programs. I would assume. I don't know what year those started, but that's my assumption. And so it goes on. For every accusation made by the War-Mongers, the pacifists have a plausible answer. There are two facts, nevertheless, which cannot be explained quite satisfactorily. The first is Germany's civil aviation, and the second is her alleged secret production of oil. The first point has received enough publicity and need only be mentioned briefly here. Experts are agreed that civil transport airplanes can be transformed into bombers in case of war. Germany possesses a large number of these transport planes, the Junkers G-38, K-47, etc., and the Heinkel HE-70 are particularly suspicious. The French dossier might also accuse the Reich of secretly manufacturing military planes, but this would be difficult to prove. On the other hand, numerous organizations like the Deutsche Luftsportverband, German Air Sport League, that have lately sprung up under the capable direction of Hermann Göring, late commander of Baron Richthofen's famous Death Squadron during the war, proved beyond a doubt that German youth is being trained as pilots, ground pilots, machine gunners, and observers. By far the most disturbing proofs of an impending European war are those given by the French journalist Antoine Zischka in his book Le Guerre Secrète pour le Pétrole, The Secret Oil War. The secret war for oil, with its spies and sabotage, its maneuvers of high politics, and the sinister shadow of the British intelligence service is, according to Mr. Zischka, the most dangerous threat to world peace. It is obvious that modern war cannot possibly be waged without petrol and paraffin for airplanes, military transport vehicles, armored cars, and tanks, let alone oil-burning cruisers and submarines. Consequently, the first consideration of every country should be to assure itself a steady supply of oil, either natural or manufactured. There are only three groups of producers in the world: Russia, America, the Standard Oil concerns, and England, controlling the Anglo-Dutch Shell interests. Therefore, any country wishing to start a war must make friends with one of these three countries, by treaty or otherwise. France has no oil in her colonies, and her experiments in Romania brought no results, so she is at the mercy of either Russia or England. The Franco-Soviet Treaty, which was signed lately, would seem to show that France is counting on Russian oil to help her through in case of trouble. But even if Russia decides to give France the support she requires, the question of transport presents a difficulty. In case of war, Soviet lack of organization and blockades in the Baltic and Mediterranean would soon cut off France's supplies. The oil supply in the United States is due to be exhausted in 1940, so there remains only England as a possible ally for France. But England, apparently, is not so sure that she wants to be France's ally. French colonies have no oil, but Burma has, and Burma is right next to French territory. England is quite aware that France wields considerable influence in the Chinese province of Yunnan, which lies between Tonkin and the oil fields of Burma. On more than one occasion, French eyes have been enviously turned towards England's possessions, so if Hitler makes trouble and England does not side with France, the latter will find herself in a tight corner. Germany has been much more clever in solving the oil question. In the Luna work of Merseburg, she has developed an immense plant for the production of synthetic petrol from coal. Quite naturally, the government has taken elaborate care to safeguard the secret of this Luna process. The plant in question has enormous machines which transform 15,000 tons of lignite daily into oil, so that in case of war, only 2% of Germany's oil production will provide enough oil for her needs. Spies who have succeeded in visiting the Luna work have tried to photograph the machines by using minute cameras concealed in their neckties, with the lenses made to represent tie pins, but the German engineers have frustrated them by flooding the plant with invisible light, either a form of ultraviolet or infrared ray, which spoils photographic negatives. Oh man, that's like some James Bond shit. And I think it's interesting that he talks about the United States depleting its supply of oil in 1940. It just goes to show that some things never change. It is not very healthy to be too well informed on the question of the secret oil war. Mr. Zizka's revelations are by far more important than futile gossip about secret airplanes and belligerent stormtroopers. They prove that Germany is in a very strong position if it comes to another war. In reality, the pressing question concerning Germany's rearmament is not the extent of her strength, but why she should be so insistent on recovering equality in armaments. According to France, Germany's rearmament can only mean one thing: war. If Hitler asks for anti-aircraft guns and tanks, it is because he intends turning them against France or Poland. If he demands equality in military aviation, it means a German air attack on Paris or Warsaw. That is the peculiar psychology of Europe at the moment. If France increases her air force, it means peace, but if Germany increases hers, it means war. By what right is Germany deprived of the natural right to protect her frontiers? Are tanks, airplanes, and heavy artillery legitimate means of defense in the hands of France or Poland, whereas in the hands of Germany they become infernal instruments of attack and destruction? One is inclined to suspect remnants of war propaganda, echoes of Hun atrocities, and cries of Germany threatens Western culture. The nations of Europe represent themselves as a friendly gathering of little angels carrying peace palms, while Germany is the big bad wolf with jaws that bite and claws that catch. In the last 100 years, Germany has waged far fewer wars than France. It cannot be said that the Kaiser was more bloodthirsty than Napoleon. The question still remains: why is Hitler so insistent on equality, and why is the whole country being made war-minded? Apart from the subject of national honor, which is so closely allied with the new spirit of patriotism now burning in every German's heart, the answer is that Germany is frightened of her neighbors, France, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the little Entente states, frightened because the Nazi leaders suddenly realized that they had overthrown a liberal regime in the very midst of heavily armed liberal countries, and frightened of invasion from the east or the west. It is fear that is at the root of the Wehrbereitschaft spirit, which is sweeping Germany at the moment. That word means a preparation for defense. Warmongers have translated Wehrgeist by war spirit and condemned Hitler for the intensive way in which he is inculcating the spirit into the subconscious minds of his people. For instance, the American journalist Mr. Leland Stowe was curious about the 4 notes tapped out by German wireless broadcasting studios to indicate a pause in the program. He finally discovered that these notes are from the refrain of a Nazi song, and they stand for the words Volk ans Gewehr, people to arms. Ergo, Hitler is hammering the idea of war into millions of wireless listeners day after day, night after night. And there's a footnote that gives the 4 notes of the program, and that's from the article Nazi Germany Means War by Leland Stowe. All right, where was I? Here. The question is, why does a cry of people to arms necessarily mean that an offensive action is intended? Surely the same cry would be used to prepare a nation for defense. No one has yet suggested that France's national anthem, which contains the words Aux armes, citoyens, citizens to arms, is an indication that France is constantly on the lookout for someone to attack. Germany is living in a state of fear, and all the Wehrbereitschaft propaganda is intended to make 65 million citizens realize that Hitler's demand for equality is justified if the Reich is to protect itself from its well-armed neighbors, but to translate Wehrgeist by war spirit to prove that Germany is thirsting for blood is no less than sheer cussedness on the part of warmongers. And that was me, the Windows sound. No viruses found. Lucky us. Students of international affairs will generally agree that Hitler has certain reasons for being afraid of aggression. Germany has established a fascist state in the midst of several democracies. In the eyes of France and Central Europe, fascism appears as the work of the devil and a serious threat to present-day democratic and capitalist regimes. Therefore, it would be very comforting if fascism could be stamped out before it had time to spread beyond its present boundaries. Mussolini established fascism in Italy without much active resistance on the part of his neighbors, simply because Italy's geographical position prevents her from becoming a serious menace to the rest of Europe. But Germany is a different matter. There you have a nation of 65 million inhabitants with the possibility of increasing to 100 million, and that nation is in the very heart of Europe. National Socialism, with its whole conception of society radically opposed to that of France, is now firmly established. Is it not possible that France fears that her own form of liberal government is in danger? Besides that, there are some purely materialistic considerations which might determine a concerted attack on Germany. France would certainly like the Rhine district. Poland would not be averse to taking East Prussia and a part of Pomerania, and as for Czechoslovakia, the addition of Silesia or Saxony to its territory would be very welcome. It is mere balderdash to claim that France or Poland or Czechoslovakia are satisfied with their present frontiers. No country has ever been satisfied with its boundaries at any one time in history, and there is no reason why the 20th century should be an exception to the rule. 120 years ago, France invaded Germany and annexed the Rhineland. Germany eventually won it back. Alsace-Lorraine has played a gentle game of seesaw between France and Germany for a century. Poland and Germany have altered their common frontier scores of times. It is the historical game of territorial expansion played with swords and bullets, a game which has been played for centuries, which was played 20 years ago, and which, under present international conditions, will continue to be played until Judgment Day. The political tension between France and Germany is to be blamed on both countries. Both sides have a reason for wanting war. Germany wants the Saar and Alsace, and it may want its revenge for 1918. France, the last stronghold of democracy and liberalism, would like to destroy German fascism before it can spread, and at the same time keep the Saar for good. But instead of stating their case plainly, as Germany has done, the liberal states hide themselves behind a cloak of peace and goodwill towards men, and accuse Germany of once more being the boogeyman of Europe. But there are facts which prove this attitude to be a lie, irrefutable facts to show that neither France nor the Central European states are the innocent cherubs they pretend to be. 15 years ago, in 1919, the German boogeyman did not exist. The Reich was completely kaput. It had thrown down its arms, anarchy was sweeping the country, and the people were sick to death of war. And 10 years ago, in 1924, the Reich was still down and out, having just suffered a severe financial and economic disaster. And 5 years ago, in 1929, the then existing Social Democrat government in Germany did not talk of Hitlerism or revenge. During those 15 years, Germany was completely disarmed, and she did nothing whatever to frighten her neighbors. Despite that, those neighbors who had pledged their word in 1919 did not disarm. On the contrary, they went on building battleships, airplanes, and heavy artillery, presumably to protect themselves from a Germany which, for 15 years, was materially disarmed and morally disintegrated. Those are facts which no one will deny, and which prove beyond a doubt that the Hitler boogie propaganda of today is to be put in the same sack with the Hun atrocity propaganda of 20 years ago. In the midst of a European turmoil, England alone has tried to steer a course towards international peace and understanding. She began to disarm in accordance with the Versailles Treaty, and her policy has been one of conciliation and tolerance. And as a policy of isolation is obviously impossible, England should be the first to shelf the old-fashioned Vienna Congress type of settled diplomacy and oblige the nations of Europe to put their cards on the table. International ballyhoo is one of the keys to the present tension. Hitler has made a faint attempt to abandon the double entendre of 19th century diplomacy. With the cooperation of England, it would be an easy matter to substitute straightforwardness for subtle deceit. No chapter on armaments would be complete without mentioning disarmament. At one time, disarmament was front-page news. Now it is almost forgotten. And yet the idea of a general disarmament with the institution of an international tribunal and international police force presents certain possibilities. Quote, disarmament will not suffice because it does not go to the root of the problem. Disarmament of individuals was achieved not by the passing of laws and statutes, but by the establishment of a policing agency. They discarded their weapons because the latter had become useless and superfluous. The same principle applies to nations. Disarmament will be achieved automatically when the security of individual nations has been guaranteed through the creation of an international police force, and when the defense of each nation has become merged in the defense of all. And there's a footnote that quote is from the New Commonwealth, Aims and Objects. The idea would be to establish an international tribunal whose members would be selected by an international authority from amongst persons who appear to furnish the highest guarantees of competence and impartiality. This tribunal would be empowered to deal with all disputes threatening the peace of the world. At its disposal would be an international police force ready to enforce the tribunal's sanctions and protect each country against aggression. Leaving aside the economic, national, or religious objections against this tribunal idea, there is one fundamental psychological reason why it is impracticable under present conditions. How can there be international harmony in Europe when two of the states, Italy and Germany, are under fascist rule, while the others still profess liberalism? The idea of an international tribunal is based on the principle that interests of each become merged in the interests of all, whereas liberalism means the reign of individualism, i.e., each man for himself and glory to the strongest. It might be another matter entirely if all the states of Europe adopted fascism, or in a general way, National Socialism, because the basis of that doctrine is that the interests of the individual should be subordinate to those of the state. The Italians have assimilated the idea, and Dr. Goebbels is making sure that the Germans assimilate it as well. Consequently, it would be an easy matter to extend the idea of National Socialism to one of international socialism. It is entirely a question of training people to think along the right lines. In a fascist state, the people are trained to think collectively. If all the people in Europe were of the same mind, an international tribunal would be easy to establish. If we call this tribunal, with all its adjuncts, a superstate, then the National Socialist principle of interests of individuals subordinate to interests of state could be extended to interests of individual states subordinate to interests of superstate. You kind of see that today with the EU, and that was also the British fascist Oswald Mosley's idea, although it's hasn't really worked out quite the same way that he imagines here. But that's it for that chapter, and we just have one chapter left. And as I got towards the end of the book, these pictures get significantly worse, just because it was hard to have it lie flat at that point. You know, my tea is still warm, or too warm to drink anyway. All right, last chapter, chapter 17. The old, the new, and the future. Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here? Said Alice. That depends a good deal on where you want to get to, said the Cheshire Cat. Hitlerism. To pronounce that word is to evoke a series of confused images. Adolf Hitler making fiery speeches, stormtroopers bringing with them persecution and senseless brutality, thousands of men and women working for the Winterhilfe, Mickey Mouse Goebbels broadcasting Puritanism and militarism in one breath, patriotism, enthusiasm, nationalism, territorial expansion, and squabbles with France, Volk ohne Raum and Deutschland über alles, one glorious, incomprehensible jumble, and the world asking, what does it all mean? The only constructive answer is that far above economic or political confusions, the world is witnessing a tremendous battle between two ideas, liberalism and fascism. Liberalism as the refuge of those who have refused to admit the shortcomings of the old idea. Fascism drawing under its banner the youth of the world to whom the present regime is not the end of all things, and who feel that the new idea may lead humanity nearer to its eternal goal, perfection. It is far more grandiose spectacle than any modern war. It is man's relentless struggle for the ideal by a never-ending series of religious, social, and economic transformations, which in the course of a few thousand years have raised man from his primitive tribal existence to the present-day standard of civilization. Fascism or National Socialism, or even better, state socialism, is sweeping the world. It is officially established in Italy and Germany, but there are few countries where it is not finding strong support, either in its Mussolini or Hitler form, or in a version modified to suit the particular needs and temperament of each nation. In the United States, it is being expressed through the NRA scheme, which aims at state control of industry and commerce. It is not genuine National Socialism because the powers governing the scheme cannot be called patriotic, In the same country, there are militant fascist groups, the Silver Shirts, being in the foreground. In England, there is a visible form of fascism in two groups of black-shirted youths, the British Union of Fascists and the Imperial Fascist League. The first is not anti-Semitic, while the second is. Both these groups aim at the establishment of a corporate state. The inner group, which is determined to socialize England, is presented by the PEP organization, Political Economic Planning, and is controlled by powerful industrialists and financiers. To them is attributed the institution of the various boards, the Milk Marketing Board, Tariff Advisory Board, etc., all of which are a modified form of National Socialism, but again without the addition of patriotism. In Ireland, the Blue Shirts are leading the fight against De Valera's liberalism. In Australia, there is a well-organized fascist movement which may come into power at the next election. Rhodesia, New Zealand, and the Union of South Africa all have their fascist movements. Outside the British Empire, the fascist cause is even more advanced. In Romania, Mr. Cuza's patriotic organization has been joined with steel helmets who boast 1 million adherents. Denmark, Sweden, Poland, Greece, Spain, and Belgium are also supplied with fascist organizations. National Socialism, the new idea, is fast threatening to become international socialism, but not without violent opposition from liberalism cum capitalism, the old idea. Civilization is not stationary. What was the accepted order yesterday is contradicted today, and that in turn will be destroyed tomorrow. A regime may last 1,000 years until one day it is annihilated, but never without a struggle. It has been the same with all new ideas, whether religious or economic. Nearly 2,000 years ago, there were Roman paganism and Judaism. Christianity was preached by one man against centuries of tradition, and despite the crucifixion of the leader, the martyrdom of the early Christians, and the attacks of heathens, the new idea was triumphant. 700 years later, Christianity was in its turn attacked by Mohammedanism, and a struggle ensued which started with the Battle of Poitiers in 732 AD and ended with the 8 Holy Crusades in the Middle Ages. In economics, there were, once upon a time, monarchy and despotism, which had flourished for thousands of years. Liberalism was born in the blood of revolutions, and despite the frenzied resistance of kings and emperors, it became universally established. Now, after a life of approximately 150 years, liberalism finds itself attacked by National Socialism. Liberals and capitalists have organized their resistance because they know that if the new idea is victorious, it means the end of individualism and the happy days of laissez-faire. This resistance is not that of the masses. It is the army of false liberals which is leading the affray. Who these men are is apparent. They are all those who will suffer if the old is replaced by the new. The masses will not suffer if National Socialism takes the place of the present social system, but a small group of men will. The first 3 chapters of this account should show quite clearly who they are. At the top, there are the capitalists, not those who in the past judiciously employed their savings for the benefit of their country, but the men who have managed to obtain control of powerful industries and who are using their power to achieve selfish ends. By the side of the capitalists stands the huge army of speculators who, by the manipulation of modern finance, have helped to create the present world chaos. These men have built and ruined industries. They have ruined thousands of farmers by their speculation in land and agricultural produce. They do not speculate for the welfare of the nation, but for the increase of their own wealth. In a National Socialist state, these men will have a very thin time. The men who, under the present liberalism, are able to engineer huge schemes of graft and fraud will lose their freedom in the new state. There will be no more Teapot Dome oil scandal from the USA, Osthill Fensklaric swindles from Germany, Hatchery, Broad Street Press, and Leopold Harris frauds from Great Britain, Madame Henau's Gazette du France, Austric, and Stavisky robberies from France, huge organizations of graft in municipal circles and police from Belgium and the USA, no more gigantic schemes for robbing the investor of his savings. Then there are the proprietors of slums whose personal interest is certainly not subordinate to that of the community. There are the men who, by judicious advertising, create entirely fictitious needs in the public mind, create luxury industries which also help to throw industry into disorganization. The first in the field against National Socialism are the authors, dramatists, and journalists who earn a comfortable income by pandering to the lower side of human nature. They write sex novels, sex plays, and sex scenarios, and their immoral articles appear in periodicals. They earn large sums of money in this way because the masses will always pay for pornography when it is offered to them. Besides the distributors of unadulterated immorality, there are those who, with the pen or the stage, glorify theft, murder, and criminality in general. They also write against religion, ridicule Christian morality for being old-fashioned, deride the sanctity of marriage, and preach the doctrine of free love. All these are ably supported by the owners of shady nightclubs, gambling dens, dope rings, brothel syndicates, and other amenities of a modern state. Liberalism allows these men complete freedom, but under a Mickey Mouse Goebbels, they would become most unpopular. Finally, there are all the writers, orators, and agitators who preach the doctrine of class hatred, who incite the masses to revolt and anarchy, and whose ideal is a world as chaotic as the Soviet state. Wherever these men pass, they leave a trail of discontent, hate, and murder. Is not Germany a living example of what all these men can do when a nation of their activities are uncensored? When 65 million men and women reach the point when they no longer take an interest in their own country, when the word fatherland loses its spiritual glamour, when the mind of the masses is concentrated on selfish materialism, and its heart is filled with cynicism, then there begins a slow corrosion which can have only one outcome: destruction of a nation's soul. The soul of a nation is something intangible, inexpressible. It is made up of centuries of historical tradition, the gradual development of the land whose soil is drenched with the blood of heroes, the crystallization of many minds into one channel, along which runs the torrent of a nation's intellectual riches, the battles that were won, the difficulties that were overcome, all that goes to build up the soul of a nation, and the expression of that soul is patriotism. Look at Germany before Hitler. In those days, how could a man feel patriotic when he was under the influence of communism? How could he feel it when he saw a weak and chaotic government at the nation's helm? He had no time for patriotism, when in his daily life he was never reminded that there was something else besides the pursuit of his petty, selfish little aims. The mistake that the Weimar government made was to conceive patriotism as a rock or a mountain, existing since the beginning of time and never changing throughout the ages. They did not realize that the national spirit is not like a rock, but like a ball of fire. It was kindled centuries ago, but since then it required a constant supply of fuel in order to burn brightly from century to century. That supply of fuel Hitler's predecessors forgot to replenish. Germany's national Geist was in danger of flickering out. It had burned at white heat during the Great War, and then came Bolshevism and chaos during the Revolution in 1918, followed by a sequence of incapable governments. Millions of unemployed, no help from the state, industry and agriculture stagnating, corruption everywhere, immorality encouraged, religion attacked on all sides, and an inferiority complex among the other nations of Europe. For the German, there was no interest, no hope, no future. Heil Hitler, der Mann aus dem Volk, his voice charged with the electricity of enthusiasm and unshakable sincerity, his heart bent on revitalizing the fatherland. Deutschland erwasch, I'm not sure. Wake up, apathetic masses, I will give you work, I will restore order, and I will regain for the Reich equality among nations. I offer you a future. The result was inevitable. The German nation was roused from its apathy into a fever of patriotic enthusiasm. The future to them no longer seemed bleak and cold, but filled with golden days when long dormant dreams would blossom forth into fragrant realities. The inherent idealism of the German soul was once more brought into play. It is that very idealism which permitted them to overcome the difficulties of the beginning. It hid the ugliness of the revolution. It withstood the onslaught of criticism from other countries. It accepted the radical changes made in every sphere of German life. It covered everything with the mantle of wholehearted approval for the sake of that glorious future which is now every German's dream. What that future is, no man can predict. Will Hitler remain at the nation's head, or will an enigmatical destiny sweep him back into the obscurity from which he ascended? Will he continue to rule the people, or will the people rule him? Can he crush the minor dissensions in the Nazi Party and thus retain its solidarity, or will the movement be torn between moderates and extremists? And finally, will the subtlety of international politics, prompted by the fears and ambitions of Germany's neighbors, lead that country into war, a war which will mean the annihilation of an age? Whatever the outcome of the conflict between a decayed liberalism and a vigorous National Socialism, the luminous fact remains that the future of the entire civilized world is indissolubly merged in the future of the Third German Empire. And yeah, he was certainly right about that. I mean, this last part where he says, the war will mean the annihilation of an age, that's kind of, where I think most people consider the modern age to start, is 1945. And, the fears and ambitions of Germany's neighbors. Germany technically invaded Poland, but you had pressure being put on Poland from England to not come to a deal on the whole Danzig corridor problem. And, the future of the entire civilized world was indeed merged in the future of the Third Reich. So he was definitely right here. And Oswald Spengler says the same thing in his Hour of Decision, which was published the same year as this. Interesting enough. He suspects that Germany will go to war due to the actions of other nations not taking kindly to National Socialist policies, such as, arresting international bankers like the Rothschilds and such. And I want to see how to pronounce this, because I've seen this term before, and it was like a popular Nazi slogan. Pronunciation.
Erwache.
Erwache. Interesting. It's not really what I expected.
Erwache.
Yeah, Erwache. So that was like a popular slogan. Did I just fart when I only just now saw this message? But no, I haven't farted during this stream. It's probably my chair. My chair makes noise. All right, let me pull this back up, because we're done with the book technically, but there is an index, like I talked about before, like a bibliography. So we finished the book, we finished all the reading, and there are 2 more pages showing this bibliography, so I'm not going to read through it, but just so anyone interested can, look at it. You get some good sex literature here. Here's the next page of that. Oops. Take a nice long look at it. Concentration camps. He has the pages that these were in reference to. I don't know why he didn't just make these footnotes, because he put footnotes everywhere else. But and this book was made and printed in Great Britain by Butler and Tanner Limited, Frome in London. And that's the back of the book. Back cover, nothing exciting there. Again, I wasn't able to get a copy with the what's it called? The dust jacket. It's 90 years old, so dust jackets are few and far between, I'm sure, and this book is hard enough to find as it is. I mean, it's like, it was banned almost immediately, taken out of publishing and printing. You can find some copies at like libraries and stuff, but when it comes to just like copies owned by individuals, it's probably very few. I don't know how many copies were sold to begin with, so I can't really give you an estimate, but I had to search every day for 2 years to find this copy, and it wasn't cheap. I'll tell you that. It's not the most expensive book I own. Camp of the Saints, the first edition hardcover of Camp of the Saints was more expensive, but not by a whole lot. My copy of This Time the World was also more expensive, but that's because it's autographed. But I think this is probably maybe number 3 for the most expensive books I own. I'm looking right now at my stack of books, and I have a couple that were around 400 or 300, like Madison Grant's Conquest of a Continent and Lawrence Brown's Might of the West were in that neighborhood of 300 or 400. But other than that, yeah, I think this is probably my third most expensive book, which was around $550. So, you just got it for free. Lucky you. And that was part of why I did this. I was really interested in this book, and I wanted to make it available to people, whoever wanted to see it. So now it's available. It's out there. It's on YouTube. If it gets taken down, I'll put it up on Odyssey or something. I don't have an Odyssey channel, but I'll make one and just throw it up there. Maybe I should put it on Odyssey anyway. That seems like what those kinds of people like. I don't know. Are there other Odyssey VTubers? Can I play the Moon Man Doom mod on Odyssey? But that's a good way to wrap up our little Banned Books Week stream. I saw that the governor of Illinois was signing a law about banned books and promoting diverse ideologies. So surely he's going to be churning out copies of this book, giving them to libraries and schools all across the state. And probably like Mein Kampf too, Camp of the Saints. I'm sure he's putting all those out there and not just giving porn to first graders. But I thought this was a good book. I mean, I enjoyed reading it. It was fairly easy to read besides all the German, which I have terrible German pronunciation. I know I'm not German. You don't have to tell me. But the information in it, I think, is fair. I think he gives us a fair look at Germany at this point in time. He criticizes them appropriately. He praises them appropriately. He gives a view of the critics of Nazi Germany, and he also gives us kind of like the international perspective and how they could have maybe done that better. So I think it was pretty good. You know, I thought this might just be like a propaganda work at first. You know, his mother is supposedly this fascist activist. The book is called Hitler's Wonderland, which makes it sound like this great thing. You know, it's just hard to really get a gauge on it until you read it. And I liked it. It's a good book. Would recommend. And I think Antelope Hill did say they were going to publish this when it goes into public domain in 2029, I believe. So you should, if you like this book and you want to own a copy of it, I recommend just waiting for that and not refreshing eBay every day for years and spending $500 on it. Just wait for Antelope Hill to put it out for like $30. But that's it for today, and that's going to be it for a while because I'm going back to the night shift starting this weekend. So I got off work today, and I'm going to stay up all night. And try to transition myself to the night shift schedule, and I'm going to be working 6 days a week for 12-hour shifts, so I won't really have time to stream during that period, and that's going to be about a month or two. Which it's kind of shitty, but I make a lot of money during this time of year. So I like it. I like money. It lets me buy these stupid books and then read them on stream for you. I could read Might of the West on stream, actually, now that I'm looking at it. And I don't think that has been digitized either. I don't know. I'll have to take another look. I remember seeing it on archive.org, but it was one of those ones that you had to, like, sign in and rent or something. I don't know. But I could read it. It's supposed to be like a Spenglerian kind of work, I guess. But I don't know. That's a problem for a later time. So I also need to fix my bitrate issue if I want to stream any video games again. It has been pretty solid at 6,000, I think, which I think is what I capped it at. So maybe I'll try bringing it back up and try streaming a real game when I'm done with my work stuffs in a month or so. But until then, there won't be any streams. This channel will just kind of be dormant. But I'll be on Twitter and stuff, shit posting as usual. So thank you for being with me again today. Thank you, Angela, for stopping by and chatting, even though you just accused me of farting and I didn't fart. Thank you. And thank you, anyone who is lurking, for stopping by. And I'll see you all later. Bye.